Good morning, world. This is Steve Rao, the host of World Edition on IBMTV, International Broadcast Media Television. And today on this show, as always, we talk about global affairs, innovation, and what we can do to build back better. And every Friday, we talk about our playbook in the United States of America, and what we can do to work with each of you to build back stronger and better than before COVID 19. Today on our show, we are going to be developing a playbook, but we're going to be assessing the Biden presidency as he's getting very close to celebrating the first 100 days of the presidency. As we approach the 100th day, I think we could say, if I was a weather reporter, that it's a sunny skies right now in America when we look at what Joe Biden has done in the first 100 days. But there are clouds and storms that may be coming soon, and we're going to be talking about that. First, I think it's fair to say that Joe Biden has had success with a very, very strong and aggressive vaccination campaign, almost reaching the goal of 200 million vaccinations well before his June deadline. By July 4th, Americans will be gathering in small groups. He's been able to pass billions of dollars of stimulus money to put money in the hands of the American people, and of course is working to get his $2.3 trillion American Rescue Plan passed and Infrastructure Jobs Act passed, the American Jobs Act. With all that being said, his approval rate today with all of those is at 53%, and his negative ratings are around 41%, but they've stabilized. So it's been a good first 100 days in terms of the report card of the Biden presidency. There are a couple of challenges, though, because sunny skies, especially in politics, do not last forever. Where are those clouds, and what should be looking for? Well, first of all, taxes. It is clear that Joe Biden is going to be raising the corporate tax rates to possibly as high as 38% for those making over $400,000 a year, and taxes will go up. And the American people are divided. Only 3 in 10 Americans today would support an increase in tolls or gas tax to pay for infrastructure improvements, and only 2 in 10 would favor a general tax increase. The second is party division. The good news for President Biden is that 85% of Democrats, or even more than that, support him. So a united Democratic Party is behind this president, and that's important as he prepares for the midterms and, believe it or not, gets ready for re-election if he runs again in 2024. The challenge is division. Biden, first of all, only 30% of white American working class voters support the president of the United States today. He only has 50% of the Hispanic community. The gap between Republican and Democratic support is higher than 80%, more than any modern time president. So Biden's calls for unity look very, very unrealistic. And finally, immigration. The increasing challenges of the border play right into the hands of the Republicans, who will be running to seek the Congress in next year and the U.S. Senate, and will also affect potential presidential candidates in a few years. Joe Biden has not been able to address the situation, and only time will tell of whether this immigration issue could become a litmus test for this president in the midterm elections and in a few years. Although right now, we don't have a president in there that is lighting the fires while in office about border issues. I could go on, but on today's show, as your host, Steve Rao of World Edition, I'm honored to be moderating this discussion as we grade Joe Biden with a report card of whether we give him an A, B, C, D, or E, or F, and what will happen for the future of this country as we continue to build back better. But Mr. President Biden, it's been a very, very stable and solid performance in the first 100 days. And your poll numbers, as the American people have shown, seem to agree with that. How long will the sun stay? Only time will tell. Storms and clouds, as we know in weather patterns, are always on the way. And on that note, we have with us Sasha Starr.
Hello, good morning.
And Rakesh. And so, we're getting very close to the, it's hard to sum up the Biden presidency in 3 minutes, but I think I did a decent job. But It's pretty interesting, right? I mean, 100 days. We also I was going to close out with talk about the space mission today, the International Space Station. But Sasha, what are your thoughts about what I've laid out for us today on this show? I mean, we're gonna be talking about you know the good things that he's doing and the challenges moving forward. But if you were a teacher grading this president right now, as unbiased as you can be, what would you be giving him on his report card?
I wouldn't give him 10, but close to it, 8 to 9 probably. And even if you ask me why not 10, well, I would say that 10 is reserved for God. And because Mr. Biden definitely is not the God, so 8 to 9 is a very high mark, I would say. Now, he has a sunshine for yet another year and 5 months. So he has a limited time where he has to do a lot of things, and but not at all costs. He still must maintain his high ratings in order to have some fighting chance in 2022 elections. And it seems to me that he found his rhythm, and he's very careful about going into fights that he is going to win and avoiding fights that he could lose. So far, again, my high marks for Mr. Biden.
Fantastic, very good, Sasha. And we're going to go issue by issue today. Rakesh, what do you think?
About President Biden, I think he's doing. I would pretty much rate him the way Sasha did, um, perhaps around 8. I think we haven't seen any significant leadership on the race issue. Um, the courts gave him a bit of a reprieve with the George Floyd case, but I haven't seen any significant issue on the
Yeah,
race matter.
and we've been talking about race so much. I didn't factor that in my monologue, but he has, dealt with bold initiatives, climate change, um, race, obviously by coming forward with things that we're going to do, but you know, not as much as we had, as
Yeah.
it's a tough situation. But let's talk about the first part. Well, actually, the division of America. What's interesting is the numbers that I thrown out in some of the recent polls that you know, he's got the support of about 85 to 90% of his party, but he has 90% of the support of his party, but he only has 30% support of white American working class voters. And the gap between Republican and Democrats is around 85%. So there's such a gap. Um, does that mean that America is just going to continue to be divided like this? And do you think it's going to be an opportunity for the Republicans to play on that division, Sasha?
Um, could you formulate your question one more time, please?
Why is America so divided? If a president has 85% of his own party, but at the same time he only has 30% of white working class voters.
Okay, okay. America is divided with or without Biden, and it's a phenomenon that started to show up. I'd say around the second term of Obama, and it's exponentially grows into Trump's time, and just continue. Maybe it's not growing anymore in Biden's time, but it's definitely there and it's staying there. And how to deal with that? That's a very difficult question. Um, you might as well ignore it. That's probably the least painful way to deal with that, because either way of confronting that is very risky because you don't know whether you will succeed or not. Actually, most likely not, because the losing side would multiply its effort to stay um, afloat, and so then you would have to devote even more effort, energy, resources, and so on. So that's probably not the way to deal with that. And this is the first time ever that it happened in America. So America has to find its own way to deal with that. I'm not sure that there is even political will to do with the dividedness. There is a huge will to prevail, to defeat the enemy. That's for sure. This is why the civil war is still a real possibility for America. Hopefully, it will be avoided.
Okay. Rakesh, what are your thoughts about why America is so divided?
Well, America is divided not because of its presidents. America is divided because that's the way it looks at itself. It sees itself as white America and black America and Hispanic America and Asian America. So that's the way America looks at itself. And if it keeps looking at itself, it'll never be united. It'll just keep being a racially splintered nation. And unless it learns to to integrate itself, there's no point blaming presidents about it. It's just the way we look. Look at the way we are analyzing. We're saying, 30% of the white vote. Why do you analyze it that way? Media is also perpetuating this division. So it's this is the way America looks at itself, and if this is the way it wants to look at itself, like a striped zebra, fine.
Okay, very good point. Very good point, Mark Lee. We appreciate that New Zealand perspective. We are. I'm going to close out my monologue. I'm going to close out today on talking about the Biden report card, but we opened up talking about the first 100 days of Joe Biden. And Mark, you're just getting here. We want to know, first of all, what you would grade his performance and why, and then talk a little bit about why is America so divided. Right now he's got a 54% approval rating, but he only has the support of 30% of white working class voters, and so many Republicans still do not support him. So, what is your report card of him, and what do you grade him, and why are we so divided?
Two separate questions. One, I would definitely say that I would give him a good grade. I definitely think that he's done a great job in the sense of the way he's been handling the pandemic and the rollout of the vaccinations, as well as a number of other issues. I would probably give him an A, maybe not an A plus, but an A, and not an A minus. But definitely, I mean, there are definitely a lot of issues that are very pressing that still have to be dealt with, and I think that he's trying to tackle those issues, whether it's climate, whether it's race relations, whether it's along the same lines of race relations, whether it's the situation on the border, whether it's, of course, trying to get our infrastructure going, of course, with public transportation and roads, and definitely a number of other kinds of things within that category. I was really impressed with Kamala coming out and supporting community colleges and trade schools and things of that nature. So definitely, I would give him an A so far, much better than his predecessor, who I constantly kept down around D's and F's. But that's just my feelings and everything. But definitely, I think that he's doing a great job as far as I'm concerned. Definitely, I think that he's sees a lot of issues that he's very passionate about that he would like to see addressed during this first term, and who knows whether he'll get a second term or not. But definitely during the first term, I know that he's got some issues that he's looking at, and is definitely being very forward thinking about the way he's going after them and everything. Definitely, we've got to work on this racial divide that is in the country. It's been brewing up for a number of years and decades, even. And definitely a lot of that also has to do, as we've talked about on this show before, around class issues as well. So it's not just a race issue. Oftentimes it's around class as well. And sometimes those there may be more similarities that we have with some of those folks in rural America that are some of the supporters and some of the strong, for lack of a better term, Trump supporters than actually they even realize, because a lot of times I don't know why they are so focused on a lot of the law and order kind of issues, because definitely that's where I think a lot of the divide comes in, is on the law and order kind of issues, where they want to take a love the police and support the police attitude and everything, whereas some of the folks in the African American community have seen where the police force historically has done some very serious damage and has continued to do damage. I mean, right after the George Floyd case, I counted at least 5 or 6 incidences just around the country immediately after that were police misconduct. There was no doubt about the police misconduct. And even in a lot of those cases, the good thing was that their people on their side of administration came out and immediately let folks know that they felt that it was police misconduct as well. So definitely that's some of the things that we've got to work on, is trying to find that common ground. I do believe that there's a lot of common ground and things along those lines. And I know that even in the civil rights community, there was a lot of attempt to try to deal with the common ground and try to find ways to work within that common ground. If you look at it, the history back in the day of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, they did reach out to some of the different communities. I mean, think about some of the activities that they had in terms of their campaigns. And a lot of those were across racial lines, across ethnic lines, across religious lines, and across a number of other lines as well. And as I've told you before, and I know that other folks here on the show are aware of this, I am a fan of Reverend Barber and some of his initiatives, and I think that that's what the Poor People's Campaign is about trying to get a lot of the folks that have common interests and common things to, but are also interested in trying to create a better world together. So it doesn't matter whether they're Hispanic, whether they're African American, whether they're Asian, or whether they're gay or straight, or whether they're man or woman, but just trying to find some of those common grounds and work on those issues together. So I'm a big fan of his Poor People's Campaign, and I'm hoping that more people will jump on that bandwagon as well.
Oh, fantastic. Before we go, and we're going to talk about some controversial things in 30 minutes, which I always try to do. So as we look at, the sun in the skies is vaccinations, infrastructure, stimulus bills, money coming in. So the first cloud, big issue is party division, which we've sort of talked about, but we're going to come back to that. But I do think it's very clear that the United States system is so divisive. And even though this president called for unity, we don't have that unity. So we're going to talk about that towards the end. But let's get to taxes. That's the elephant in the room. So some of the data that I found, 3 in only 10 Americans approve of a gas tax or toll for basic infrastructure improvements. The tax issue is going to become, once again, a wedge in the political debate. Why do I want to tax those making $400,000 or more? So I had this debate with my father last night over dinner. But Sasha, what do you think about taxes as you want for infrastructure? And do you think it's fair to tax someone making $400,000 and corporations at a higher rate to make investments in our infrastructure in the U.S.?
Taxes is a very, very critical issue that can actually damage Biden's presidency. Not because it's a bad idea, not at all. The problem is that there are much more people making less than $400,000 a year than those who are making $400,000 and more. But majority of those people, they are a silent majority. Most of them don't care.
You call me.
Speak up. They just say, well, whatever it's going to be, whatever it's going to be. Unfortunately. However,
I am so tapped. I'm actually in the negative myself right now. I'll be in the positive all Monday.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Oh, he's sorry. He wasn't muted. He didn't mute. It's okay. Sasha, go ahead. You were saying.
Okay, so those people who are making $400,000 a year or more, and who will be affected by the bill if it will pass. They are very vocal, very influential, and they will be fighting for every dollar, whatever they will have to pay extra in taxes, in spite of all loopholes available and so on. And most of them, I know some people who are paying only $750 a year while being a billionaires and all that stuff. So it's an uphill battle, and it seems to me that it's much easier. Although the cause is right, obviously the taxes have to be raised. It goes without saying. However, that's something what can damage Biden's popularity, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Rakesh, from a New Zealand perspective, what do you think about taxes paying for the infrastructure plan?
I think there's no other way. If you want the infrastructure, it's not going to come out of nothing. If you just print money, you weaken your currency, which is already sort of teetering on the edge. So there's no other way. You just got to pay the taxes and build the infrastructure, and then think of it as a sort of a. It's the attitude to the infrastructure that makes a difference. If you look at it, taxes will. When you invest in infrastructure, you invest in jobs because it creates jobs in the building of the infrastructure. It creates jobs in terms of the reach that infrastructure provides. So I would say it's an investment. Taxes are an investment, and sometimes you just got to grin and bear it.
Okay, yeah, that's fair enough. Let's go into immigration before we talk about party division, and then we're going to talk about some other things. Immigration is the other storm cloud on the way, right? So you've got we've talked about his efforts to get the Dream Act passed, the Farm Modernization Act, legal immigration, where we talked about the skilled workers. What about the border? Because it looks as if this one issue it clearly shows that many Americans, over 55, 60%, are opposed to allowing immigrants to come over the border. And it's costing us, what I heard last night over our dinner was at about $747 per child to be housed and stayed in these detention centers. So how does the president get out of this pickle that he's in? And do you all believe that this could become a political issue in the midterm elections, which are next year for the U.S. Senate, U.S. Congress, and a litmus test for the presidency in 2024? We'll start with you, Mark Lee.
Oh, I definitely think that the immigration issue will be a major issue within the midterm elections. I think that a lot of the states that have high immigration populations and everything, so a lot will depend on how things go in that regards in terms of people's support for him. I know that definitely even in the midterms, Texas, Florida, and even North Carolina are very much swing states and things along those lines. And all three of those have high Latino populations. And definitely, even if you add California as well. So I definitely think that these are going to be very pertinent issues. And I'm definitely a supporter of the DREAM Act and actually have friends here in North Carolina that are supporters of that as well. So definitely, I'm thinking it is something that needs to be done. And I'm hoping that more people will get behind it and that we'll see more folks actually being welcomed into the U.S. through the DREAM Act. A lot of these folks are been here for a number of years, and they have actually grown up in North America and in the U.S. to be exact. So I definitely think that they need to be getting the support. And I know a lot of folks may not necessarily agree with me. And of course, we always hear the folks talking about folks from other countries coming and taking jobs. But if you look at the jobs that a lot of folks in the Latin community are working, a lot of those jobs, when you then ask people of different ethnicities, whether that be African Americans or European Americans or others, if they would even go for those jobs in construction and a number of these other fields, even in farming, they look at you cross-eyed. So like I said, they say one thing and then they act another way when the reality hits. So definitely, I think that they provide a very vital part of our economy, and we need to be giving them the support that they are due.
Sasha, you mentioned the point about you brought up a very interesting. Mark, thank you for that insight. You brought up a very interesting point about taxes being something that could cost the president politically. Do you believe that the immigration issue on the border is a similar kind of thing, and it could be a litmus test for these, people like Josh Hawley, who's said he's going to run for president, Ted Cruz, the Trumpers in the Republican Party? Do you think they're going to grab it as political to flex their political muscle in the next election, and do you think it costs the president a political capital?
Yes, it's a possibility. Remember that one of the points what made Trump president was immigration policy, and this history can just repeat itself. So it's very, very, very hard potato how you play it right. You see, you still have a year and 5 months left where you're in control and you can do something meaningful. And by the time that you will do all the proper moves to affect the issue, unfortunately, there will be no much time left before the election will come. So very, very tough minefield to negotiate.
Absolutely. Rakesh, what is your talk about? What is your perspective on immigration? And you brought up Rakesh. First of all, I just want to say, Rakesh, I really appreciate your perspective of, America sort of being this melting pot or mosaic of different cultures. But if we continue to divide ourselves based on racial lines, that we're never going to be united. I love the way you put that. That's very, very well put. But immigration, the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Do you think that this cost the president political capital?
It might, but I think that one of the things that America could look at is why do people want to come to America, and look at also what Europe and other countries where there is a significant inflow of immigration, how they are handling with it. Look at Denmark is now repatriating Syrians who have lived in Denmark because they say that Syria is now reasonably stable. Now, with America, I think most of the guys are coming from Mexico and places like I think Puerto Rico is actually to some extent a part of America, but other countries, other Latin American countries, and perhaps it might be a good long-term point of view to analyze why people want to leave those countries and come to America, or why those countries are not, instead of bringing the people into jobs in America, why don't you spread the pie a little bit across the continent? I think NAFTA was some sort of a drive to that effect. If you could stabilize Mexico, which is now completely, I think, a drug-run state, at least from the impression that I've got. The president is not in power. It's all these cartels who are running all the law and order and just massacring people, entire villages and things like that. Who would want to stay there? They'd want to come to the United States. So this one of the reasons, and I've noticed that over at least last 10, 15 decades, you've not really bothered about the drug problem. Nobody looks at killing the demand for drugs. Everybody's looking at killing the supply of drugs, which is a bit silly. If you kill the demand, and then the supply will automatically dry up. The moment the supply dries up, then you have more stable states and stable neighbors, and then you don't have this problem anymore. But I don't know what the guys in CIA and etc. are doing, but they don't seem to be doing their jobs.
Yeah.
If I can just jump in real quick, it's interesting that Rakesh has that perception, because actually I've had a couple of friends that are from Mexico, and actually Zach, who does our funk music with Zach show, had a guest on one of his shows that's actually from that area of the country, and it would be my argument that the entire country of Mexico is not necessarily as run over by the drug lords as some of our media may be given the perception of. Because what I'm hearing from a lot of folks is that, yes, there are places like that that are definitely drug controlled, but you can say the same thing about the United States, and you can say the same thing about parts of Europe as well, that there are areas of our country that are definitely have a lot of folks in the gangs and in the drugs as well. So I don't know that we can make a general statement about Mexico, but I do think that that is a media perception that is out there. And I sometimes think that sometimes the media can do a disservice to a country by painting it one way or another based on what is the perceived notion of what is going on there. And I'm not saying that there aren't problems in Mexico. There are clearly problems there, but I'm also sure that there are parts that are not as dominated as other parts are in that drug culture and along those lines. And I'm sure that they are working on that issue as well. And you also mentioned, and it's actually something I was going to just get people's thoughts on and everything, yourself included, Steve. But you mentioned Puerto Rico, and I've actually got friends that are of Puerto Rican descent. Definitely New Eurekan, some of those that have been here for one or two generations, as well as, of course, having a number of friends in DC. And I know that for years, Puerto Rico and even the District of Columbia have been wanting to be the 51st and the 52nd state. And I definitely think that in a lot of ways that could be a good thing. But I'm just wondering of folks here on the panel what their thoughts are, because there is another drive to get DC statehood and definitely Puerto Rican statehood as well, even though some in Puerto Rico don't want statehood. They would rather be a separate country altogether and even get rid of the ties to America. So there's that aspect as well, because there are some in Puerto Rico that are definitely more nationalistic and would like just to be separate, maybe, and definitely still an ally of the U.S., but not be a territory, even though there are others that are interested in statehood. So I'm just wondering what folks' thoughts are about Puerto Rico and D.C. going for statehood, because I know there's even a push now to get D.C. statehood.
Yeah, I read about the DC statehood thing in CNN or somewhere, BBC, and I'm surprised. Why not? You know, what's the harm of a couple more states? It just doesn't. I don't see any problem with it if that's going to ensure better governance. Better governance should be the touchstone. You know, whether it's Puerto Rico, DC, or any place. And if you have good governance, then you won't have gangs and you won't have drug cartels and all that kind of stuff, you know. But I don't know. Maybe I'm naive, so I'm going to, never. The reason why I mentioned Mexico is because I was actually planning, along with my wife, to come to Mexico and see, some of the heritage of Mexico. But then we heard of those British tourists, the British family that just got shot up or something like that. And then, the complete, you don't want to go there and get killed. So the whole thing, just was dismissed out of hand. But this is the impression that I got about Mexico, and I've heard then about an entire village which got massacred for something. So I don't believe that in any state you can accept the complete massacre of a village, just like how the Nazis did to Lidists in Czechoslovakia. You can't have that. Then it's a failed state. Right. And if it's a failed state, you're going to have immigrants.
Yeah, well, Sasha, what is your take on it? I don't know as much about this issue, but go ahead.
I totally agree with Rakesh. So the plan to go to Mexico to get killed there is definitely not very good idea, and probably should be avoided at all cost if possible. And now about Puerto Rico and the DC, I'd say, of course, it's a very clever plan by the Democrats to get these two areas to almost assure next presidential victory. So that's not such a bad plan. About Puerto Rico, what are you thinking, that they want to stay independent? That's interesting issue. I remember I was in Caribbean many times. I was on the island of Antigua, that several years ago became independent from the British Crown. And I talked to some locals and asked how they enjoy their independence. And they said, "Oh my God, it's horrible. Before we were under the British Crown and we had all the help and medicine and the best what there is to it. Now we are independent. Nobody cares about us anymore. So we have to try to survive." And indeed, I went to a local hotel and I started to play blackjack. And the dealer, I was winning, and dealer was very nervous. And when he had shuffled the cards, I went to a bar to have a drink and asked the barman why the dealer is so nervous. He told me he's the owner. I said, okay, sorry, no more questions. And I stopped my game right away. Anyway, so the independence has its advantages, but also its disadvantages as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in favor of statehood for some of these places like Puerto Rico and Washington D.C. But I think the challenge is the infrastructure, and we're already having a challenge in America with infrastructure with the 50 states we have. But I haven't really thought it through. But I think that might be a good conversation for us to have. So as we now transition into our Build Back Better playbook section, I'm going to have some parting thoughts on Biden's first 100 days as I close out this today's show. But we have about 30 minutes left, 28 minutes. What other things would you like to see from this president, in the next 100 days? Just in terms of sort of a lightning round of the kinds of plays we need in the playbook as we move forward. So I'm going to start with Mark. And is there anything that you think we're not talking about in America that we need to be talking about?
I'm trying to think if there's any issues that are not being talked about. Well, one issue that I think that we need to definitely address, and he's definitely alluded to it, but we haven't seen enough conversation around it, is that definitely, I think it's in the month of May is Red Nose Day, which talks about child poverty. And yes, there's even child poverty here in North America as well. So whether it's our adults that are facing poverty and things of that nature, or whether it's our children. So definitely, I know that, of course, Nick and Kim have oftentimes talked about education. And of course, we have Learning Unwrapped here. So I think that we need to have some serious conversations about our education system, but also about children that are facing poverty. So I think that this might be a time to have some serious conversation about the future of America, because whether it's America or whether it's any other parts of the globe, the children are definitely our future. I know that that's the lyric of a song as well, but that's a very true lyric. And definitely, I think that we need to do more in that regards. I mean, the fact that we've got, and I forget the percentage, but it's a pretty decent percentage of children that are in what we consider poverty and everything is astounding, and definitely is something that needs to be addressed. I mean, the pandemic kind of brought out some of these figures, but it's been known for a while, and definitely we need to be having some serious reforms around our education system in general, because I do agree with what some of our founders here at Network have said, which is that we're in the 21st century, but in some ways, our education system is stuck in the 18th century. So we need to have more development of our education system, but also more care of our young people. And then another issue that I know my friend Captain Newborn and others are very much concerned about is the state of veteran affairs. So even though we've seen some improvements in veterans affairs, there definitely is more room for improvement. So that's one of the other things that I would hope that there'd be conversations around. In addition to police reform, I would hope that we would have reform in the way that we treat our veterans. I've got some veterans in my family, some that have passed on, and some that are still here in this lovely country of ours, including my cousin Emmett, who I believe right now is in the Middle East, because he is not doing military duty over there, but he's doing like some consulting work and things along those lines. So definitely, I would say that our way that we treat our veterans also needs to be addressed as well. So the children and the veterans.
Sasha, what are some things we're not talking about? Which is always a difficult question, but it's a good thing. Are there other things you think we should be talking about in America that we're not talking about today?
Well, I think we so far we didn't touch anything about the foreign policy of America, including what's Biden doing or planning to do. That one. Mm, now, it seems to me that the world is coming to the end of the pandemic, but not as early as you think. It probably will happen in the second half of this year, and possibly a year from now, life will be probably 95% back to normal. So, which industries, companies will be affected by this, how it will be back to normal. This is a huge question. And of course, but I think government should do as little as possible and leave it to private enterprises to figure out what's the best way to deal with this problem. Now, foreign policy, of course, it's 100% in the hands of government. And it seems to me that Biden so far he hasn't made impactful mistakes, and he has to just get a little bit more time under his belt, finish all these domestic issues, keep all international problems at bay, as he's doing now. So that's probably the best policy for him, what he's doing right now.
Rakesh, any thoughts about things that we're not doing that we should be talking about in America?
Yes, strategic thinking. I don't see any strategic thinking. Even now, we're talking of moving factories out of China into Vietnam. What about moving them back to the USA? I mean, that's where the jobs are required. And I don't hear that. I just hear of, let's get some move to another another low cost country. You with so many people out of jobs in the United States. I mean, I would have thought that there would be some the drive would be to focus a little less on profits and focus more on building a strong economy. I don't understand that. I just see the same thing being repeated. That let's go move it to Vietnam, let's move it to Bangladesh and whatever. And hey, what about the USA? That's where you needed the jobs, isn't it? Isn't it strategic that you have your own stuff, you make your own vaccines and stuff like that? No, there's no strategic thinking at all. Zero.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. And David, I want to try to reach out to him next week, David M. Walker, because remember he talked about that consistently. That there's been a lack of a strategic plan in the United States for a number of years now, and you can't really have a direction if you don't have a strategic plan. Maybe that's a great segue for our last comments before we get into some political gossip, which we always like to do on Fridays. But for me, the unreported story, and I think Sasha hit it on the nail, is the foreign policy of the United States. There's a lot of questions right now about Afghanistan, what that's going to mean, pulling our troops out for the stability of that region. The other areas that we never talk about are Venezuela, Guatemala, Latin America, Cuba, Southern Hemisphere. And let's not forget that we have a big immigration problem with people coming from the border, but across the border, to the border. But why are they coming? Because they're coming from nations that are being run by despondent authoritarian dictators. Venezuela is a perfect example. I went there in the late 90s when Perez was the president. They were writing books about democracy in Venezuela, and now you have tanks in the street. You have people being murdered and the most unhumane conditions. And the United States is silent on this issue. And I think there's a connection between stability in the Southern Hemisphere of our world and the immigration issue that we have. Are there any thoughts on that before we segue into our final issues of the day?
Yeah, I'd like to just pop in and say that, look, first, get your own house in order. Get your job sorted out, and then worry about other people. It's high time you either shut down CIA for some time and focus on your FBI and get your own house in order first. Get your strategic thinking where you want the country to be, and then decide what you want to do with other countries who are messing around. Leave Venezuela and Colombia is a much bigger problem, if you ask me, because they're the ones behind the opioid crisis.
Right.
So I wouldn't waste too much time on Venezuela. Yes, I know it's communist and Colombia is capitalist, but I don't think there's much difference. They're both equally deleterious to the United States interest. So I don't think this obsession, with communist capitalists, that's got to go. Just look at what is good for your own country and fix it, rather than meddle around with the affairs of other people. And if you can, the focus I would have if I were the president is to make sure the message about drug addiction and the possession of drugs, I would make that very, very harsh, penalties for even possession of drugs. I know that in Hollywood it's very glamorous to have drugs, and these are the opinion makers, these are the leaders. If you're going to have this persist, and because you don't want to offend whoever's the person in whatever place, then you're just perpetuating a situation which has already given you so much grief. Where will you get productivity if you have a workforce that is hooked? If you don't provide sensible, it is common sense. The World Health Organization, the United Nations, all have said a human being needs 1 month holiday to recoup. You don't have that in the United States. These are fundamentals to productivity. It's all chasing the dollar in an almost rabid fashion.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
It's interesting you say that, Rick.
When I see this, I think, what? Does the United States think its people are all robots? I mean, what kind of idiocy is this?
I don't. Sasha, what do you? Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's gonna be interesting, and it actually comes back to Sasha. Something Sasha said earlier about like us coming back to 95% by the end of the year or the early part of 2022. But that being said, this new normal, whatever this new normal is going to be, is going to also kind of test our workforce and things of that nature. Because I haven't talked to anybody in the workforce that doesn't think that the new normal is going to be a combination of a new hybrid normal, meaning that part of the workforce will be in offices, whatever those office situations look like. And that's what we have historically been doing in the United States and in the globe. But there's going to be quite a few folks that'll be working from home, and that will be what they'll be doing on a regular, which means that that's going to make some interesting corporate decisions as well, because I don't know how much monitoring you can do of your people when they're working in their individual offices and you're in like a centralized location, whatever that centralized location is. So productivity may be increased, but also it'll be interesting to see like what the how the accuracy and the other kind of factors are within that productivity. So that's going to be one of the things that's going to be interesting. In terms of the world and everything, I think that one of the things that we need to look at more of, and certain people have been doing this, including some of our enemies in the past, if you want to use that term, or adversaries, but we've got to look at making sure of working within our relationship with other countries and having a good kind of like trade balance and support balance. I think that they've done some good work in some of the African nations in terms of like Ghana and Nigeria, of seeing them develop some business infrastructure and some even economic infrastructures that include entrepreneurship. And some of that is being fueled by people that are doing similar work in the U.S. So I'm hoping that more and more we will see this kind of collaboration, say, between various populations, not just the African American population, but various populations within the U.S. and countries that are definitely on the rise in Africa. Africa is definitely a part of the world that is not given paid enough attention to, including some of the positive things that are going on there. I remember y'all were talking about Venezuela decades ago. One of the ways that the then Venezuelan president made his inroads into the country of the U.S. was he actually reached out to places like Detroit and places like Chicago in order to give them some support in some of the things that they were doing in the realm of civil rights and things of that nature. So And I know that definitely historically, if you want to go back to the 60s, that's something that the Castros did as well, particularly Fidel. But definitely that's something that I think we need to have more of, is a relationship with our foreign partners that are in Africa, in Asia, and in other parts of the globe as well.
Sasha, any thoughts on this issue?
Yes, a few. First of all, I wouldn't be surprised to learn that success of developing economies in Nigeria and some other African, in fact, many African countries, is China. China is behind that. They're doing fantastic investments in these countries. They're building a new infrastructure, social clubs where people learn Chinese language. And if you will ask if they need European powers or United States or anybody else, they will definitely say absolutely not. We are very happy with things developing now. The Chinese are very good, prudent managers, and that's what would they prefer. However, let's now compare it to Latin America. If you remember Monroe Doctrine, so the Latin America, Central America supposedly was a sphere of American influence. How much really America is doing in all these countries? Um, I visited Latin America last year on a cruise. Mm, I've seen Argentina, Brasilia, Uruguay. Um, they America almost like doesn't exist there. United States, I mean, they're very happy to be just without it. I don't think that America is trying to build up its influence there. So at the same time, America didn't denounce Monroe Doctrine. So I don't understand what United States are planning to do about these issues with Latin America. Um, Now, to talk about influence in Asia, while there is powers of China, obviously Japan, even South Korea, I don't think it's realistic for America to wrestle some kind of influence in that part of the world.
Well, you've given me some ideas about maybe bringing in some guests, maybe to talk about foreign policy, because there's the domestic playbook, which we've been hearing a lot about for the past year: vaccinations, stimulus packages, infrastructure bills. But then there's a foreign policy playbook, right? The Southern Hemisphere, South Asia, China as a rising superpower, and then countries like Myanmar, which we don't hear a lot about. We hear the pulling out of Afghanistan, but dictatorship in Myanmar and civil war. And what does this mean for American policy moving forward? We have a few more minutes left. Now, I'm going to, is there anything out there today controversial? I mean, we had the George Floyd verdict. Justice was served. Now we have to wait for the sentence. We've had some additional shootings in America since then. I'm losing count, but we pray for their families. There's going to be some protests in Raleigh. And at the same time, the positive note is we're moving towards a herd immunity, which I think by June in North Carolina, we'll get close to having 2/3 of our population vaccinated. So are there any thoughts about that?
Well, you know that the COVID disease is rampant now in India, and that is where you're getting a lot of your vaccines from. So you'll probably be looking at a diminished supply, but I believe the United States already has about 12 billion doses of vaccines, so I don't think that it's a major issue. Myanmar is the military out there is propped up by China. So I wasn't surprised that when the developments out there, that was very much to be expected. But anyway, yeah, you're right. Basically, foreign policy is part of strategy. If you don't have a foreign policy, it means that you basically don't have any strategy. So that's why you don't have anything else. And you don't need to have an announced policy. You can have something which is an unannounced policy. So it's not important that the president announces his policy. What is important is that he has one. And nobody knows as yet whether he does or not.
Okay, good point on there. Are there any other final thoughts? We have a few more minutes. What other things do you think we need to talk about before we close out today? Anybody?
Okay, I wouldn't stop talking every day about one thing. What would essentially will put absolute stop on police shooting. The issue is abeyance of the orders of police officer. You must obey orders. If you will obey orders, you will stay alive. If you will disobey orders, your chances are pretty high to be killed. So maybe some people don't value their life a lot, and maybe they have no problem to be killed. That's a different story. And unfortunately, I don't know how to deal with that. But if you value your life and you want to stay alive, please obey police officers' orders.
Yeah, I saw the shooting of
Mark,
one
anything?
16-year-old girl, and she was trying to stab some other woman and then try to kill another woman. And the police officer was saying, get down, but she didn't. And then so he had to, I don't think he had much choice. He had to shoot that girl.
Yes. Mark Lee, any
I mean,
final thought?
there are such cases as when police officers have to take action, and definitely, I'm not saying that that is not the case. I've got a cousin that is a Georgia Bureau of Investigation officer, a GBI officer. So definitely, I know that there are cases when lives are being threatened, including those of law enforcement. But there are also times when law enforcement is definitely being overly aggressive, and some of that is because of the nature of some of the folks that have gone into law enforcement. Because definitely there are folks that might have been overly aggressive in the military, might have been overly aggressive in other places, and the law enforcement is a reason that they have decided to act out some of their actions that they were doing, whether that was in the military. And there have even been cases of that I'm aware of even some law enforcement people that came out of gang mentality and other mentalities. So there are, while enforcement and while being obedient to the law enforcement is very much something that we should do on a regular basis, there are some bad apples within law enforcement, and those bad apples need to be weeded out. Rakesh oftentimes talks about weeding out the criminal element. Well, we also need to weed out the bad elements that exist within law enforcement. I'm not saying that it's rampant, but there are definitely a lot of folks that are in there in a lot of areas. And like I said, sometimes they have come in from the military and they've come in from other aspects where they had that kind of go after aggressive, kill all kind of attitude and things of that nature. So while it is good to obey law enforcement, we've also got to make sure that there are the negative aspects of law enforcement that are not in the force. I would rather have many more people like my cousin Jonathan, who is very much of one of the good guys, a true good guy, than some of the ones that I know that are not the good guys. So like I said, don't think that just because they have a badge that they're automatically a good guy, because there are some negative folks as well in law enforcement, and those are the ones that we need to be finding a way to get out of that field. And I don't even want them in the security field, because some of them will also go and work security in, like, department stores and a number of other things where they can bring that bad attitude to that environment as well. So definitely that's just kind of my thoughts. And on a lighter note, one of the things that I know is coming up in about several months, about 3 months from now, and I hope that it's a very successful event, since it does look like it's going on, and I haven't heard anybody saying that it's not happening. But from July 23rd to August 8th, it looks like we will be having some sort of Olympic type event and everything. So definitely looks like folks will be having an Olympics in the year of 2021, and that was the one that was supposed to have been held last year. But it does look like it will be happening this year in 2021 over there in Tokyo and all of that. So wish them much success and hope that it is a successful event, even though it'll be interesting to see how they pull it off and if they're able to pull it off. But right now it's still on the books.
All right, guys, we are out of time. I'm going to thank everyone for coming, and I'm going to close out today just to go a minute over our time. Um, but first of all, we thank you all for being with us today. This morning at 6 a.m., flying over Raleigh was the SpaceX international astronauts on their way to the space station. And so my metaphor today is flight and the remarkable American journey that we've been on since the founding of our nation. What's clear in any flight, whether it's a space mission or a plane flight, is that if you have the right destination in mind and the right crew, there's no limit to where you can go. There's no limit to how high you can fly. It's clear that the captain of our journey since the first 100 days has been Joseph R. Biden. And as the president of the United States, he has taken us in a different direction. We don't see tweets in the wee hours of the night. We don't see press conferences every day. It's a very different type of presidency. But this president is taking on other issues like climate change, addressing race and law enforcement issues, addressing xenophobia against Asian Americans, making sure that on the dashboard in the cockpit that the American people are also building back better with economic relief, with vaccination, and taking us in a different direction. He is working hard to take us through sunnier and greater days in America, but like any flight, there could be turbulence. And we as Americans and a global nation, global planets around the world must deal with this instability. But the final thing on the cockpit dashboard is empathy. And this is a president, I'll close out with this, who lost his daughter and wife in a car accident and his son, Beau Biden, to brain cancer from a glioblastoma. When asked by Oprah Winfrey how he's gotten through those tragedies, he said plain and simple, I get up every day and live my life with purpose. I get the sense that Joe Biden's life has been about purpose, purpose for America. He may not do everything right, but this is a president that I do believe feels for our nation and the 500,000 Americans or more who have died from this pandemic. Whether you agree with him or not, as Americans, we wish him all the best as our commander-in-chief. And as he begins his 101st day in the White House, we will continue to pray for the success of him and Kamala Harris and the American people. On that note, I want to thank each of you for being with me today on World Edition. We'll be back in a week or so. We might be taking a little break for a few days, and we will be back and we will be notifying you that as soon as we can. Thank you so much for being with us, and I will see you soon. This is Steve Rao, your host, signing off on April 23rd, 2021. Be safe wherever you are.